ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وبعد. So to continue inshallah with where we left off over the last few weeks, and just a recap quickly to bring the topic into focus. We are looking at alamat ulama al-akhirah, or ulama al-akhirah, the signs of the ulama who are serving their posts, their positions for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They sought knowledge and they are teaching, they are giving rulings, etc. for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for the purpose of their akhirah. So what are the signs? Number one, أَلَّا يَطْلُبَ الدُّنْيَا بِعِلْمِهِ, that he should not be a person who seeks knowledge for his or he shouldn't be a person who seeks the dunya through his knowledge, as the alim is the one who's already acquired knowledge. So he's not a person who seeks out status, fame, wealth, positions, and so on and so forth, any advantages of this dunya through his knowledge. And if that's the case, that's a problematic sign. And again, it's not to look at others and to ask, do those people fall into this? But it's to look at ourselves within our actions, and for those that are seeking to be from the learned in Islam. Then he says, وَمِنْهَا أَن تَكُونَ عِنَايَتُهُ بِتَحْصِيلِ الْعِلْمِ النَّافِعِ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مجتنبا للعلوم التي يقل نفعها ويكثر فيها الجدال والقيل والقال. So I'm just going through these quickly as we've already discussed them. That he's from those who has a focus on beneficial knowledge. And how do you define beneficial knowledge? Knowledge which will benefit a person's akhirah, not knowledge which leads to argumentation, confrontations, debates, and so on and so forth. He said, she said, basically. And we spoke about examples of that happening in our time and the types of knowledge associated to that. And then he goes on, rahimahullah ta'ala, to give the example of what Hatim al-Asam said to his teacher, Shaqiq al-Balkhi. He mentioned, I learned from you 8 things. In how many years? I think it was 33 years. 33 years he spent with his teacher, and he said, I learned from you 8 things. And his teacher, we said, was surprised how so little you learned in 8 years. And he said, tell me, what did you learn? So just to summarize, number one, to make the hasanat, the mahbub. He said, I look to the creation, and all of the creation have a mahbub, that which they love and they're affectionate of, and that which people love doesn't enter into the grave with them. So I made that which will enter into the grave with me my love, i.e. hasanat, the rewards for the good deeds. Then he says, the second one, basically, mujahadatun nafs, to struggle and strive against the self until the self becomes content with worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Struggling with the self until the self becomes content with worshipping Allah. And we mentioned that this indicates that Hatim al-Asam, who is very well known from the first generations of Islam for his piety, his knowledge, and so on and so forth, his worship, it's not something which a person is born with. A person is not born with love of worship. Naturally, of course, we all we all want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Definitely, there are moments where a person feels compelled to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there are other times where a person may not want to. A person may want to do something more entertaining for the self. But it's about training and conditioning the self to accept worship, and that to become a part of a person's life, and eventually the connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be established, and a person will start to enjoy the worship. It's not something which takes place immediately. It's like the runner's high. No one likes to run. But I shouldn't say no one, but many people don't like to run. But when they become accustomed to it, they start to enjoy it. They start to enjoy the run to the extent that if they don't go running, they miss the run. They miss the feeling of running and exercising, etc. Then توجيه ما له قيمة إلى الله تعالى, to turn that which is of value to Allah. Why? To invest our valuable stocks that we have in this dunya into our akhirah market. How so? If I have something valuable, I use it and utilize it to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rather than use it and utilize it for the sake of this dunya, entertainment simply. Or for example, if I have wealth, I say to myself, how can I make the most money? Invest in the thing today, cryptocurrencies, for example. Well, how do I say to myself, no, how can I use this money, this wealth, that which I've acquired to acquire the next life? What can I do to invest into the next life with that which is valuable to me? And of course, the most valuable thing that we have, our lives, our time, our health. And those are things that we should invest into the akhirah. Spend our lives in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not spending our lives running after the lowly dunya that we're currently living in. And then he says, I saw that everyone has something which gives them their status, gives them their position. For some it's wealth, for some it's lineage. Today perhaps for us it might be qualification, education, your job title, and so on and so forth. He said, I looked, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? That the akramakum indallahi atqakum, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is who? Atqakum, the most pious of you. He said, so I focused on piety so that I can become kareeman indallah, so that I can become a person of karam with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a person of nobility and status in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sight, not the sight of the people. Then he spoke about al-hasad, the fifth thing. He said that hasad, he saw that enmity stems from hasad. Ill feelings towards others stems from hasad. Pain stems from hasad. And he said, so I left off hasad. And hasad, if you think about it really, and we spoke about it previously, it's a real problematic ailment of the heart, illness of the heart. Why? Because hasad is a lack of acceptance for that which Allah has given to others. If I feel jealous that a person has a better car than me, I'm not pleased with that which Allah has given him and that which Allah has given me. So it's a lack of contentment with the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the person who has hasad in his heart and allows it to grow, because all of us have hasad in our hearts. We all have hasad. We have to work on our hearts to rid our hearts of hasad. That's a part of the test of this life. The one who says, I don't have any envy in my heart, he's lying to himself firstly and foremost before anyone else. We all suffer from envy. It's something which occurs in the heart. The test is to rid ourselves of that envy, to work on the envy. So with the hasad, if you think about it, the one who allows hasad to take place in his heart and allows it to grow, this person is going to live a painful life. Why? Because he's always going to see someone who has more than him in something or another. So working on the heart and ridding ourselves of hasad, it benefits us solely in our dunya and then our akhirah. And then he spoke about taking shaitan as the only enemy in this life. Why? Because shaitan is the one who whispers and plots and deceives and so on and so forth. And if a person can adopt that mindset where the only real enemy that he has in this life is shaitan, then he will become a lot more forbearing. He will become a lot more able to deal with people. And he will be overlooking of people's mistakes because he sees their mistakes as coming from ignorance or the influence of shaitan. So it's important to remind ourselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌ فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًا. That shaitan is your enemy, so take him as an enemy. And there's a statement that I believe originated in Europe. The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince man that he doesn't exist. Why? Why is that the greatest trick that he ever played? Why would it be the greatest trick?
If you don't know your enemy, you can't defeat him.
If you don't know your enemy, you can't defeat him, number one. And if you don't know your enemy, then you'll assume what?
It's coming from them.
Yeah, so you'll assume that he's your friend. Of course, you cannot see shaitan, but you can hear his whispers. And so you assume those whispers to be thoughts of your own. You don't recognize that there are external ideas that are coming to you. So you recognize them as your own, and you assume that they're your own, and you entertain them. And that leads to the corruption that we see spreading currently. Then he says, التوكل على الله وحده. So he said that I looked to the people and I saw everyone is relying upon something, relying upon someone, and I look to the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Whoever relies upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is sufficient. So he said, I turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and relied purely and simply on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, think about the verse, وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Whoever relies upon Allah, a conscious decision to be completely dependent upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even when you cannot see where whatever it is that you need is going to come from. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? فَهُوَ حَسْبُ. Allah is sufficient for that person. And that's an amazing place to be at. Then he says, وَمِنْهَا. So now we've summarized basically what we took previously. So we're going to take some new points now. وَمِنْهَا. So and from the signs of the ulama of the akhirah, أن يكون غير مائل إلى الترفه في المطعم والمشرب والتنعم في الملبس والتجمل في الآثاث والمسكن بل يؤثر الاقتصاد في جميع ذلك. So this is one that should make us consider like the way that we live, and it takes us back to that topic that we were discussing. Are we living excessively in society currently? What would a balanced lifestyle look like? He says that one of the signs of the ulama of the akhirah is that they do not lean towards luxury of food, luxury of drink, luxury of clothing, of living conditions, and the beauty of furniture and so on and so forth. You wouldn't enter into an alim who lives for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the akhirah's sake, Imam al-Ghazali saying, and find that he's excessive in these things. Does it mean that you're not allowed to eat nice foods and drink nice drinks and so on and so forth? That's not what he's saying. He says, بَلْ يُؤْثِرُ الْإِقْتِصَادِ فِي جَمِيعِ ذَلِكَ. Instead, he takes a balanced approach in those things. He takes a balanced approach. If you overindulge in the luxury, that's not balanced. And if you overindulge in the opposite, you purposefully buy that which is perhaps so cheap that people will point towards it, then that's not balanced. That's an imbalanced approach. And both can be as problematic as the other. A person would look to someone who's driving, for example, a new model car, and say a person of Allah shouldn't be driving that, for example. But likewise, if you know a person has the income to buy a reasonable car, yet he's buying a very old, rusty banger, people likewise point and say, why is he driving that? So it's a problematic approach on both sides. The approach should be what? Balance. But the issue that we have is we're living in a very imbalanced society where we've become accustomed to different types of food daily, different types of drink, not daily, but throughout the day. We've become accustomed to wearing different clothing every single day, a new outfit for every single day. That wasn't how people previously lived. We've become accustomed to furnishing from all parts of the world and so on and so forth. So what does it look like to be balanced in this kind of society? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. What does it do to a person when they're living such a lifestyle? What does he say? He says, ويتشبه فيه بالسلف رحمهم الله تعالى ويميل إلى الاكتفاء بالأقل في جميع ذلك. That the alim of the akhirah, he should be balanced in all affairs, and he should take on the manner of the earlier generations of Islam. He says, وَالتَّحْقِيقُ فِي, the reality, the truth of this matter, i.e. how should a person live? He says, أَنَّ التَّزَيُّنَ بِالْمُبَاحِ لَيْسَ بِحَرَامٍ. That beautifying oneself with that which is permissible, it's not haram. It's not haram to buy a luxurious coat if a person can afford it. He says, وَلَكِنْ الْخَوْض فِيهِ يُوجِبُ الْأُنْسُ بِهِ حَتَّى يَشُقُّ تَرْكُ. He says, but the problem comes when becoming accustomed to that lifestyle will lead to a difficulty in leaving it. So why is that a problem? Why is it a problem if a person develops a taste for the luxurious foods and drinks and clothings of this life, and it becomes difficult for him to leave? Why is that a problem?
You want to feed your habit.
Exactly, a person wants to feed that habit, which could lead to what? We're talking about the ulama here, but this is relevant to ourselves as well. It could lead to what? It could lead to a willingness to sell aspects of our deen, a willingness to overlook certain principles that we're supposed to be abiding by. It could lead to a person leaving off aspects of the deen. Why? Because they want to live the lifestyle that they become accustomed to. If you think about the alim, for example, and we're going to come to a point relating to the rulers shortly, but if the alim, for example, has become accustomed to the luxury lifestyle, and then it's at a stage where it's difficult for him to leave that lifestyle off, and then he is threatened by the ruler. The ruler tells him, if you don't give this particular fatwa, then we're taking away all of your wealth. We're going to freeze your bank accounts and so on and so forth. What's going to happen?
He's going to comply.
He may comply. He may be put in a position where he's going to comply. Why? Because he doesn't want to leave off that luxurious lifestyle that he's lived. And for this reason, the earlier generations of Islam, they would shun the dunya. They would shun the dunya. Because if the dunya becomes attached to your heart, then it's very difficult to make the right decision. And we spoke about the dunya being in the heart over the last few weeks. And we spoke about how problematic it is. But we live in a society it's founded upon acquirement of the dunya. So is it even possible that we haven't got an attachment to the dunya in our hearts as individuals, living within a society that has become all about the dunya? And if you look at online culture indicates that the dunya has seeped into the heart. It's deeply rooted in the hearts of people. Just look at online culture. We don't when we take a picture of ourselves, we take a picture of ourselves in the best of light. New haircuts, brand new clothes, nice shiny cars, and so on and so forth. The dunya has become that which people run after in this society, and if we're a part of the society, it's very likely that we're suffering from the same sicknesses. So it's important that we question ourselves, we ask ourselves, where is it that I've developed an attachment to this dunya? It could be foods, it could be relationships, it could be clothes, it could be wealth, it could be an array of things. Then he says, وَمِنْهَا أَن يَكُونَ مُسْتَقْصِيًا عَنِ السَّلَاطِينَ فَلَا يَدْخُلْ عَلَيْهِمَ الْبَتَّةِ. He says, from the signs of the ulama of the akhirah is basically, in brief, that they have no relationship with the rulers. They have no relationship with the rulers. He says, مَا دَامَ يَجِدُ إِلَى الْفَرَارِ عَنْهُمْ سَبِيلًا. So long as they don't have the ability to escape having a relationship with the ruler. Why? He says, بَلْ يَنْبَغِي أَن يَحْتَرِزَ عَنْ مُخَالَطَتِهِمْ وَإِنْ جَاءُوا إِلَيْهِ فإن الدنيا حلوة حجرة وزمامها بأيدي السلاطين والمخالط لا يخلو عن تكلف في طيب مرضاتهم أو مرضاتهم واستمالة قلوبهم مع أنهم ظلمة. He says that the alim should try his utmost best to stay away from the rulers, even if the rulers come to him. Why? Because he describes the dunya, as the Prophet ﷺ described it, as it's a beautified, tempting thing. And he says, وَزَمَامُهَا بِأَيْدِ السَّلَاطِينَ. And the reins of the dunya are in the hands of who? The rulers. The rulers are the ones that hold the reins of this dunya. Meaning, they have the ability to give and to take. And they have the ability to influence, and so on and so forth. He says, وَالْمُخَالِطُ لَا يَخْلُ عَنْ تَكَلُّفٍ فِي طِيبِ مَرْضَاتِهِمْ. And the one who entertains the rulers, the one who enters into the place of the rulers, he's not going to be able to escape trying to please them in some way or another. Very few are going to be frank and open with the rulers, because at the very least they'll fear the outcome of what they say. Or subconsciously, if not consciously, they will be trying to acquire something from the ruler. They'll be trying to acquire some favor from the ruler. That's the way power works. It's a power dynamic that takes place in many situations. He says, and this will take place even though the rulers in their nature, they are oppressive. Most rulers in their nature are oppressive in one way or another. And so this would be problematic for the ruler, for the alim to be involved in such a relationship. He says, وَعَلَى الْجُمْلَةِ فَمُخَالَطَتُهُمْ مِفْتَاحٌ لِلشُّرُورِ وَعُلَمَاءُ الْآخِرَةِ طَرِيقُهُمْ الْإِحْتِياطِ. He says, generally speaking, even if we are to excuse some of the ulama in developing relationships with the rulers and so on and so forth, he says it opens up a door to evil and corruption. And the ulama of the past, the ulama of the earlier generations, their approach is an approach of ihtiyat, taking the cautious and safe option. Now, in our time today though, it's a different situation. The context has changed. And to some extent, the ulama need to have a relationship with the rulers. There has to be a relationship. But it depends on who the individual is and the nature of the relationship and so on and so forth. I mean, if you look to recent history and you see, for example, in Egypt, some of the ulama that were justifying killing protesters and shooting at them whilst they were in prayer. Those soldiers were acting on a fatwa that was given to them, that it's permissible to do so. So what person who has fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give such a ruling? And you can look beyond that. Wherever the alim has a close relationship with the sultan, the hakim, it's problematic for the alim. He says, قال حذيفة بن اليمان رضي الله عنه إياكم ومواقف الفتن قيل وما هي قال أبواب الأمراء. So Hudhayfa, he said, speaking to the tabi'een, stay clear of and perhaps some of the sahaba, stay clear of the places of fitan, the places of fitna, corruption and tribulation. And it was said, and what are they? What are these places? He said, أبواب الأمراء, the doors of the rulers. يدخل أحدكم على الأمير فيصدقه بالكذب ويقول فيه ما ليس فيه. He says that one of you will enter upon him and you will testify to the truthfulness of that which he is saying, but you're lying in your testification, in your testimony, because what he's saying isn't true. And you will say about him that which isn't actually true. That's the nature of especially previously anyway. He says, وكتب عمر بن عبد العزيز رحمه الله تعالى إلى الحسن أما بعد فأشر علي بأقوام أستعين بهم على أمر الله تعالى فكتب إلي أما أهل الدين فلا يريدونك وأما أهل الدنيا فلا تريدهم. He said that, look, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who was from the righteous of his time, he was an alim himself. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he was an alim himself. And he sent a letter to Al-Hasan al-Basri, asking him to send to him some ulama that would aid him in basically ruling and aid him, give him counsel when he needed their counsel. And Al-Hasan said to him, as for the people of Deen, they don't want to be around you. They don't want you. Why? Because they're scared of losing their deen in the courtyard of the ruler, regardless how pious that ruler used to be. He said, and as for the people of dunya, you don't want them. You don't want the people of dunya around you because they're going to harm you. They're not going to give you the right advice, the right counsel. He said, وَلَكِنْ عَلَيْكَ بِالْأَشْرَافِ فَإِنَّهُمْ يَصُونُونَ شَرَفَهُمْ أَن يُدَنِّسُوهُ بِالْخِيَانَةِ. He said, turn to the ashraf. The ashraf, basically the noble of society, the righteous of society with nobility. Namely, nobility through lineage to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, why? Because they will protect their honor and they won't deceive you. Because to be seen as deceptive and lying would be degrading of their noble status. But today, Allahu A'lam, does that exist? Do we have people that care about their honor and their integrity and their dignity? Perhaps very, very few. Today, honor and dignity and concern for one's image when it comes to character has been lost due to the get-rich-or-die-trying nature of society that we live in, where everyone is game, except for the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mercy upon. Then he says, وَمِنْهَا أَلَّا يَكُونَ مُسَارِعًا إِلَى الْفُتْيَا بَلْ يَكُونْ مُتَوَقِّفًا وَمُحْتَرِزًا مَا وَجَدَ إِلَى الْخَلَاصِ سَبِيلًا. He says, another sign of the ulama of the akhirah is that they do not rush to give fatwa. They're not hasty in giving fatwa. He's talking about who? Ulama. The ulama of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ulama of this akhirah. They're not hasty in trying to give fatwa, rulings and edicts. Why? Because they fear the result with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They fear standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being questioned. A person who comes to another person to ask him about the deen is asking him to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Yawm al-Qiyamah and testify to what he has said to this person, to justify this person's action. If a person comes to you and says to you on Yawm al-Qiyamah, in this dunya, how do I perform wudu? You have the right to show him if you know how to perform wudu, but you are standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with your answer. If you don't answer him correctly, that's problematic for you. If you answer him correctly, inshallah, there's a reward. But apply that same logic to more complicated matters. And then go online, Twitter, and have a look. Perhaps YouTube, so on and so forth. I mean, you have people now giving fatwa, they don't even understand the Quran. They haven't read the Quran once in their entire life in Arabic. Yet they're giving fatwa, they're giving rulings. And they're arguing with people who are in the process of qualifying, if not already qualified, in the sciences of Islam. Those individuals don't realize that they're going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they will be responsible for everyone who reads their posts and acts upon their posts. It's very, very dangerous. We have to be very, very careful with our words. Our words are, we are going to be held accountable for our words. If we say halal about something which is haram, it's a major, major, major sin. If we say haram about something which is halal, it's a major, major sin. It's a dangerous position to put oneself. And he's going to give examples. He says, وَإِن سُئِلَ عَمَّا يَشُكُّ فِيهِ فَإِن سُئِلَ عَمَّا يَعْلَمُهُ تَحْقِيقًا أَفْدَى. The alim of the akhirah, if he's asked about something that he's certain of, he gives a fatwa. How do you perform wudu? Certain knowledge. But if he's asked about something that he has doubt about, قال لا أدري. He says, I don't know. If he's asked about something he has doubt about. So the only time an alim of the akhirah will say he will give an answer is when he has certain knowledge about it. He's certain that he knows what he's speaking about. Any other time he won't speak. He mentions rahimahullah Imam al-Ghazali قال الشعبي لا أدري نصف العلم. So we mentioned this statement before, and as I mentioned, I believe it's attributed to Isa alayhi salam. I'm not sure, but he says قال الشعبي لا أدري نصف العلم. That al-Sha'bi rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the Imams of the earlier generations of Islam, he said to say I don't know is half of knowledge. And we spoke about this before. Why is it half of knowledge to say لا أدري? وكان ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما يسأل عن 10 مسائل فيجيب عن واحدة ويسكت عن 9. He said that Ibn Umar, one of the most knowledgeable of the Sahaba, he would be questioned about 10 things and he would only answer one, and he would say I don't know for the rest of them, 9. So only 1 out of 10 questions Ibn Umar would give an answer to. Today, imagine if we had a world-renowned scholar sitting here and giving a lecture, and afterwards he receives 10 questions and he only answers 1. He gives the answer, the rest he says, I don't know. How many people are going to walk out to the masjid and say, what type of, that's not a person of knowledge? And if someone who was not knowledgeable came, sat, gave a lecture and answered every single question, people would leave the masjid and saying, subhanallah, did you see that person's knowledge? Unbelievable. Yet the alim who only answered in that which he was certain about would be considered to be ignorant. And the one who answered everything would be considered to be knowledgeable. And Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions that if you were to meet the ulama of the previous generations, you would assume them mute, unable to talk. Why? Because of how little they actually would speak. They wouldn't debate. They would state what they assume to be the truth and they would refrain from further discussion. Whereas today, we assume the most knowledgeable is the one with the most convincing argument. The one who can speak for 2 hours is knowledgeable. The one who doesn't speak is not knowledgeable, ignorant. But the reality is, a person who is knowledgeable knows how weighty words are and therefore doesn't speak as often, because of the implications of speech. For every statement that we say, there are things that we're not saying, and there are things that we are implicitly saying. Especially when it comes to issues like theology, when it comes to issues like Islamic philosophy and so on and so forth. And so if you really want to see a fool, look at the one who talks all the time. in matters of Islam, online especially. And I'm sorry to be harsh, but it's the reality. If you have a young person who's speaking all the time on Islam and talking about every area of Islam, it's very likely that this person is foolish. Because that's not the way of the ulama of the past. It's not the way of the learned people. The learned people, do you think a person who fits this description would even want to be online? No. These individuals ran away from the dunya. Yet today we're chasing the dunya in the name of what? Islam. In the name of the deen. We're chasing the dunya. We're making the dunya our vehicle. We're making Islam our vehicle for the dunya. Whereas previously they would make the dunya their vehicle for Islam. And it doesn't mean to do this, it doesn't mean you have to be an alim. It could be, for example, you're reading a book, and you're reading the book not because you want to benefit, but because you want to find gems to put online and so on and so forth. Twitter, benefits and WhatsApp reminders and statuses. And let's ask ourselves a real question. The amount of reminders we've received online through Twitter and WhatsApp and Instagram and Snapchat, how many of them have we actually implemented into our lives? If our ummah implemented all of the reminders that we get, the Islamic reminders, we would be so pious. But we don't. We say, wow, subhanAllah, amazing. Then we forward it. Normally that's what we do. We become desensitized, in fact, to beneficial reminders because we see so much of it. We watch it for entertainment. So it's, the person who speaks often in the deen is not to be assumed knowledgeable, especially if it's publicly and young in age. The younger in age, the more suspicious. The younger a person is, the more suspicious you should be of that person in that which they're saying. Always get it attested. That's not to say that if someone is old, they're necessarily accredited in that which they're saying, but there's the higher chance that what they're saying is qualified. But we like to listen to the young, the entertaining, and so on and so forth. It's something to really consider where we take our information from, who we're listening to. A beneficial reminder, yeah, fair enough. But when it comes to giving fatwa, when it comes to giving rulings, when it comes to talking about grave matters, like look what happened in Syria, for example. Look at the type of information that was being put online and the types of things. Ruined lives, destroyed homes. Likewise, when it comes to aqeedah, theology, you have a young person and he's categorizing the entire ummah as being deviant and misguided and so on and so forth. And this person has only been practicing Islam for 2 years, 3 years if that, only just learned some basic knowledge in Islam, only just read a book or two in Islam. Even if they've traveled abroad, and they've learned about Islam, it doesn't give them the right to categorize the rest of the ummah. What does al-Ghazali rahimahullah say? He says the ulama of the akhirah, they are invested in which type of knowledge? Knowledge which benefits their akhirah, not knowledge which leads to them talking about the people. If a person really feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would be very, very reluctant to speak about other people because there's a high risk of falling into backbiting. One of the earlier scholars, he was asked about backbiting those who are deviant. And this is a common excuse used, oh, you can backbite people that are deviant and so on and so forth. Firstly, who are you to declare them deviant? And secondly, was that the practice of the earlier scholars of Islam? It wasn't. One of them was asked and he said, I don't do it because I don't want my tongue to become used to backbiting and talking about other people. Then he says, وَمِنْهَا then he says, وقال عبد الرحمن بن أبي يعلى عبد الرحمن بن أبي ليلى, who was a contemporary of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, and there was some contention between the two. أدركت في هذا المسجد 120 من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So he said, I met in this masjid 120 of the Sahaba. ما منهم أحد يسأل عن حديث أو فتية إلا ود أن أخاه كفاه ذلك. He said that none of them would be questioned about anything, a hadith or a fatwa, except that he wished that his brother would suffice him of the question. Sahaba. And Imam al-Ghazali, he mentions in the original Ihya that they would send the person to another person, to another person, to another, until it came back round to them. Today, when someone asks us about a hadith or about a fatwa, we like to jump in, even if we're not involved in the conversation. We find it exciting to talk about these things. But look at the Sahaba. The Sahaba were reluctant to speak about hadith, to speak about fatwa. Why? Because they knew how grave it of a mistake it would be to talk without knowledge. And Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he speaks about this in his Sharh of Sahih Muslim, the one who falsely attributes a statement to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever lies, attributes something to me which I didn't say, let him prepare himself for his place in hellfire. And Nawawi speaks about this, the importance of actually being certain of what you're saying, and so on and so forth. It's not something to take lightly. Just as a person, if they came to you with a heart condition and they asked you, what shall I do? I have a heart problem. You wouldn't tell them, you wouldn't give them some home remedy. You wouldn't inform them of something that you've read online. Why? Because you know this is a serious matter. It could lead to death. You would say, I advise you to go to the doctor, go to your GP. Let me speak to someone I know who works in a hospital, and so on and so forth. Likewise with the deen. A heart condition affects the dunya, the deen affects the akhirah. And to give a bad opinion in medicine is far better than to give a bad opinion in a deen. You're still going to be held accountable in the akhirah. But out of the two, the deen is more dangerous. Then he says, ومنها أن يكون أكثر اهتمامه بعلم الباطن ومراقبة القلب ومعرفة طريق الآخرة وسلوكه وصدق الرجاء. He says that from the signs of the ulama of the akhirah is that they give most of their time to that which relates to the internal purification and rectification of the soul, and understanding the path towards the akhirah, and the methodology of approach that one should take in acquiring closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in brief, he's saying that the ulama of the akhirah, their focus is what? The akhirah. That's a sign. And again, it's not to say that we should be looking at those who teach and the ulama of our time and saying, oh, this person doesn't fit this description, he must not be from the ulama of the akhirah. No, that's not our place. We should be reflecting upon ourselves, reflecting upon our own reasons for learning, reflecting upon our own reasons for teaching if we teach, and so on and so forth. And of course, you will look to some of the ulama and you will find that they fit this description. But it's best not to start categorizing, and no, focus on the self. And the most important thing to understand is that the ulama of the akhirah, they measure their actions, including their words, and when they're measuring their actions and their words, they're thinking about the potential consequence that their actions and words are going to have on their akhirah. If they can acquire wealth, but it's at the cost of their akhirah, they're not going to do it. If they can acquire status, but at the cost of their akhirah, they're not going to do it. When they speak, they're not going to say something which is going to harm their akhirah. And this is the way that we should think. For example, my position at work, my status, my wealth, the words that I use, that which I allow to come out of my mouth, and so on and so forth. I should weigh them up. Are they pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If they're not pleasing, are they displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If they're not displeasing, what's the benefit if it's not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And so on and so forth. We'll stop with that inshallah for this evening.